The planets have aligned, and once again, the prophecy has come true. That's right, folks. It's time for another episode of the Roundtable Rethink podcast. With me, your host, Uncle Paddy, joined every week by twin brother and spare parts bin, Andy the Asshole. Woo! And of course, we couldn't do any of this without bestie, Stevie Tel Avivi.
Good evening, gents.
This week, we'll be talking Deepseek, AI, O3, battery chemistry, the impending retail apocalypse, trade wars, and any damn thing we please. My, oh my, what another incredible week of news it's been. But before we get into that, lads, how's the week been?
You go first, Andy. You're the one that's struggling.
So still sick, but yeah, I'm here. I'm ready to go. I 8 or 9 days into this lurgy that just won't lift. At this point, I am kind of part man, but mainly Lemsip and Benadryl cough mixture. And because I'm not sleeping, I'm also approaching Gary Busey levels of impaired cognition. So, but I'm here. I remain. I persist. And in the unlikely event that I do expire before the end of the show, my last act will be to take both of you with me, because the podcast is eternal, even if we have to broadcast every week from the bowels of Hades.
Well,
The afterlife.
I'm delighted to see that Paddy has got the ambulance outside ready to harvest your organs if you go.
Exactly.
He's had that warning a few times. All right, folks, let's get into the docket this week. It's been another incredible week for AI news, so we'll start there. So I thought the first thing we would do is go back and set the record straight. So last week, we'll just recap. We talked about Deepseek. So new Chinese AI model that came out of thin air. Nobody saw it coming. Certainly more capable, at least as capable than all other AI models so far. Built and deployed at a fraction of the cost.
So they said.
So they said. So if you remember back to last week's episode, the number that got bandied about was about $6 million to train and deploy Deepseek. Turns out that number, we only discovered this after the podcast had aired, was a very, very low number, very specifically targeted at the final training run of Deepseek.
It was a deployment stage.
Yeah. And so what we've subsequently discovered... So there's a few things that we should clarify. Deepseek, still a breakthrough. Deepseek, developed by a whole bunch of badasses in China. Deepseek, tremendous innovation, and still, even at the new revised numbers, still a breakthrough in cost and efficiency. But it turns out it wasn't quite as dramatic as it first appeared.
I think what's really interesting, just to focus on for a second, is it is highlighted China as having an incredible level of technical ability in an area where it wasn't expected to have it.
Yeah.
There was some real badass quantum physicists who did a lot of the programming, and that was very, very impressive.
Yeah. So I think it's as technically as impressive as it was presented. However, with the new accounting that's been done on it, the costs are still much lower. They're just not as catastrophically much lower as we had originally thought they were.
And I think one of the things that, from my reading of it, is it's actually hard to work out the cost because they're still trying to work out how many of the NVIDIA chips may have been.
Nobody knows for sure
in the system.
exactly what it was trained on.
There may be holes in the system, stuff going through Singapore. So I don't think we'll ever actually know what the cost of building the thing was.
Yeah.
But am I right in saying they still get credit for first dibs on this novel approach, which is
100%.
Yeah.
And again, from what I was reading, you'll probably know more, Paddy, the Chinese were also incredibly good because they were able to work around the NVIDIA programming language, which is one of the main things that kind of ties people to NVIDIA.
Yeah.
So they may well have used NVIDIA chips, but they've actually found workarounds in a lot of the programming language as well.
Yeah, stuff like MOE, mixture of experts, and distillation were novel, incredibly awesome techniques, which, by the way, will make AI cheaper, faster, and better for absolutely everybody. Because every other research team, because it is an open source model and the white papers are published, every other research team right now is tearing that apart and applying the efficiencies within that to their own models.
And just to, in case anybody's hearing this for the first time, Do you want to have one more stab at explaining it exactly what those efficiencies were? Or are you just going to double down on your dolphins analogy for last week?
Mixture of experts is this idea that if a model's made up of parameters, and in Deepseek's case, it's made up of nearly 700 billion parameters, think about each parameter as somebody you would ask a question of. Okay, so if you wanted to know about... Why do I blank for examples every time we have this conversation?
Best bikinis to wear on a podcast.
If you wanted to know about the best podcasting mics, then you don't have to walk up to all 700 billion experts and go, do you know anything about podcast mics? And get 699 billion no's. If you could just identify ahead of time the experts that know about podcast mics and only ask questions of the experts that know anything about podcast mics,
you can run the query fantastically.
Then you can
more
run the
efficiently.
query fantastically more efficiently than lighting up every single parameter in the model. So that's the mixture of experts analogy refined. Distillation is a different technique. So distillation is the idea of the student and the teacher. The teacher being a bigger, more established model like O1, and then the student being able to distill knowledge by checking its answers against the teacher with some kind of reward pattern built into that. So here's an answer. Is it the right answer? Is it a wrong answer? Do you think it's a good answer? The teacher responds back. The student in AI terms, reworks its policy in order to produce a better answer to then ask the teacher again and eventually get a tap on the head and told, yep, you've done really well.
You're a good boy.
And so that's where distillation comes from. And by the way, new information that came out is it only took about 800,000 samples of distillation from other models to get to this level of quality. So for me, that was quite startling because you'd think in this world it's billions, hundreds of billions, millions, squillions, trillions. It actually only took 800,000.
Let's not ask who they took them from.
Well, we know who they took them from.
Yeah.
It was taken from ChatGPT because at one point, if you asked Deepseek what it was, it would tell you that it was ChatGPT.
It was self-identifying as
ChatGPT.
Multiple times.
Hoisted by their own petard.
So the markets thought that this incredible breakthrough had happened and the cost of these things had collapsed. And then in a single day, you had $1 trillion wiped off the value of global stocks. Now, that's mostly recovered. And I think the AI ecosystem had a bit of a heart attack, but has subsequently recovered because the new number is actually Deepseek was probably trained and developed for tens of millions of dollars rather than single-digit millions of dollars. And so it might be the difference between training Deepseek for $30 million versus training ChatGPT for $100 million. So by any measure, still a great technical breakthrough, still fabulous levels of efficiency, but it doesn't actually turn the economics of AI upside down. This big bet in NVIDIA that pretty much everybody in the world's made. Do you not think the terrifying part of that whole thing was that as goes NVIDIA, goes the stock market?
Yeah.
I mean, the entire stock market is now predicated on this future that we've painted or we're all betting on for NVIDIA coming true.
But what we've seen in models after models is when someone gets that kind of lead, all we're going to see now is people trying to race, catch it. There's going to just be challengers. Microsoft, Apple, Google have all been ahead of the game of their time. It's the way of tech and tech advancement for decades now.
And it's so big, it's hard to even quantify. In that one day, there was these analogies where in a day it shed the value of like Mercedes-Benz, FedEx, and, you know, some other gigantic company, you know.
But I think the whole point was the change didn't make any difference to what's going to build out AI. All it did was question the cost point, but actually also leveraged the cost point because you suddenly got more for less. You know, if you've got better programming, actually what we've really realized is we're going to get more out of the chips rather than less. So I don't think it in any way fundamentally changed the pricing model, and that's why we've not really seen that fall in stock markets continuous, as you say, rebounded.
Yeah. So, of course, nothing sits still in AI for too long. So OpenAI had a response ready to go within days. And so earlier in the week, they launched a new class of model called O3. So O3 comes in various different sizes. So O3 Mini Low, O3 Mini Medium, and O3 Mini High. And so think about the low, medium, and high as the level of reasoning that you're dialing in your request. And so it's probably worth at this point mentioning that there are models that are retrieval models, like ChatGPT-4 is a retrieval model. You ask it a question like, what's the population of China? And it goes and retrieves a response that it's been pre-trained on, okay? And then there are models like O3, deep reasoning, and O1 and R1, which are reasoning models. And so the difference between the two things is reasoning models are asking themselves a variety of questions and going through a stepped process to get to the answer. So if you're Paddy, you could go, here's a report from Gutology that's 27 pages long, and it's got all the good bacteria and bad bacteria. And in particular, I want you to look at all the good bacteria that I'm deficient in. And then what would be the probiotic you would recommend based on that? And so you can actually see it working through its reasoning. So it goes, okay, gathering information on this particular gut bacteria.
Thinking about Paddy's belly.
And I have to say, if you haven't yet subscribed or watched one of these things, it is fascinating just to watch a computer literally interrogate itself and then pull in parameters and answer each of its own questions step by step.
The process is called chain of thought, isn't it? That's
chain of thought reasoning, or inference time reasoning. It's got loads of different names, but it's this idea where it's going through a stepped process, gathering information, and then armed with the new information and asking further questions until it feels like it's landed on a really high quality answer. And the tools that I'm using that actually allow you to visualize that chain of thought reasoning, I mean, I'm seeing 13, 15, 20 different questions that it's asking itself, getting an answer, verifying the answer against other sources to check the quality of the answer before it actually provides the answer to the questioner. So that's the difference between a standard model like GPT-4 and things like Deepseek R1 and now O3, which are specifically reasoning models. Now, they take longer to run, but they provide a much higher quality answer. And who knew, by the way, that...
And they can deal with more complex questions.
They can deal with far more complex questions. So who knew that just by giving the same model more time to consider the answer could fundamentally improve? So if it's not a latency-bound workload, if it's not a Google search that you need to get back in 0.02 of a second, and you can actually let it run for 20 seconds, the same model can produce a fundamentally much higher quality result if you just let it the
just
time
like
to
asking
think.
a very smart person the same
100%.
thing. Yeah.
So anyhow, O3 came out. It's optimized for the STEM specialization, so it excels in things like science, math, coding. It's 25% faster in its responses than O1, and the tokens that it produces are 93% cheaper than O1 models. So again, they're following Deepseek down the hill in terms of the pricing war. They're trying to match Deepseek and have managed to produce very similar or better results than O1 at 93% the cost of what the tokens used to cost. So that's again a fabulous step forward in capability and this dual axis thing that we keep seeing, which is the capabilities are expanding and the cost is not decreasing. I mean, it would be the wrong, is it the verb or adjective to use? Costs are only decreasing, costs are collapsing.
Yeah. And listen, as somebody just anecdotally who's in the process of building a custom GPT, I just actually noticed last night that the prices have been updated on ChatGPT for the tokens. So now in GPT-4o, it's $2.50 for 1 million input tokens. It's $10 for 1 million output tokens, and for O3 Mini, it's $1.10 and $4.40. So a 55 to 70% collapsing overnight in the price of tokens. And when you're actually building these things, tokens get really expensive really quickly.
And I think what it's showing is that even things like the traditional Moore's Law, twice as much, half the time, half the cost, is actually no longer applicable.
No.
It's exponentially faster and cheaper.
Yeah. Which brings me nicely on to the next point as we get to the end of AI here. So, in addition to the O3 models, just when we thought the week couldn't get any more exciting, O3 dropped, Google dropped their version, which was their Gemini 2.0 deep research. Last night at midnight, I am literally just sort of clocking off for the night, about to turn my phone off and go to sleep. And then I see a tweet by Sam Altman introducing O3 deep research, the most powerful AI model ever made, solving PhD level tasks and producing effectively these 20, 50, 100-page research studies and reports. Now, there is a trade-off here, which is it takes a lot. It's very expensive, that's the first thing, because it's doing a ton of thinking, and it takes a very long time to come back with the answer. So depending on the complexity of your query, it could be anywhere between a minute and 30 minutes to respond.
Yeah.
But what it will respond with is an entire research paper that years ago you might have paid McKinsey or Deloitte to come up with. Okay, at tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of dollars.
So this isn't a use case for the average ChatGPT user.
No.
This is for the deepest, most difficult questions in society right now.
100%. I know you're going to talk about, we're going to talk about retail collapse, but these are all the things that are foretelling how white collar services are going to be affected also within a period of time.
Yeah. So what I'm always trying to do, and where I'll finish here, is as these things develop, and they're coming so fast now, and the capabilities are expanding, doubling and tripling, and the cost is collapsing 10x, I'm always trying to find an appropriate metaphor to try and convey to the audience just how dramatic this is. And so I think where I'll end this is the standard AI models that everybody is familiar with are becoming so good that they've effectively saturated the traditional benchmarks for AI.
So just for people again listening to this at home, the benchmarks are the tests, the series of tests that it puts the model through to determine how advanced it is.
Yeah, so there's tests like MMLU, which is Massive Multitask Language Understanding. There's other tests like Human Eval. There's other tests like Hella Swag, which is an advanced algebra test. That
sounds like an Urban Dictionary thing,
I love the
doesn't
Hella
it?
Swag test.
So there's about 10...
you look hella swag the night.
There's about 10 established benchmarks that every AI model gets put up against. The problem is they're all scoring in the 80s and 90% now against each benchmark. So we've saturated the benchmark. We now need a new benchmark. So in light of that, the dual organizations of Scale AI and the Center for AI Safety came up with a benchmark called HLE. And it's an acronym for Humanities Last Exam.
Ooh, God, that sounds ominous.
Fucking connotations.
A good thing or a bad thing?
Oh, sounds bad.
And so, and the reason it's called Humanities Last Exam is pretty chilling, because once it actually starts to saturate and ace this benchmark, it will now be smarter than all the smart people in the world combined. Therefore, we will not actually be able to conceive of the appropriate benchmark going forward. So it's the whole, the student cannot give the master a test or a benchmark because you're the student, right? And it will be the master and we'll be the students at that point. So this is Humanities Last Exam. What is it? It's 3,000 questions sourced from nearly 1,000 experts across 500 institutions in 50 countries. The questions were originally selected from about 70,000 candidate questions through a rigorous review process, and it covers advanced topics in things like math, natural science, technical engineering, humanities. It's multimodal, so it's not just text questions. It's in the context of being able to generate image content, interpret image content, video content, so it's multimodal.
Just before we go any further on that, Paddy read out to me one of the questions.
Well, I've got
earlier.
it here, Andy.
Have you got it here?
Yeah.
Wait till you hear this.
Yeah. And so the benchmark's been designed so that it's closed-ended questions with unambiguous answers, and that it resists internet lookup through original unpublished content. So it's not like a question that could be answered by data the model's been pre-trained on and just retrieve it. It's forcing the model to go through the reasoning steps so that it's not an easily retrievable answer. And then finally, the actual test set of questions, at least 50% of the questions are privately maintained, i.e., they're not published and they're not known ahead of time. Therefore, no individual model maker can game the system and, optimize their model for the benchmark. Okay, and that's been done in various different industries.
Yeah.
There's a famous benchmark for your iPhone called Geek Score. And so it's pretty obvious now that Samsung and iPhone, competing for the best Geekbench score, optimize their chips to perform well on that benchmark. So it's been well designed to try and stop the benchmark being gamed. Now, as an example question, this is how just obtuse and weird and highly reasoned the question is to get to an answer. So one of the questions is, hummingbirds within apodiforms uniquely have a bilaterally paired oval bone. How many paired tendons are supported by the sesamoid bone? That's one of the 3,000 questions. So pretty hardcore stuff. And so the idea is, once the AIs are able to saturate this benchmark and either score in the 80 or 90%, the AI will be smarter than all the PhDs in all subject matter everywhere. And what is life? What does society look like? What does the world look like?
So just say that again
when AIs
slowly.
are that smart.
When it aces this benchmark,
It will be smarter than all the PhD level scientists
in every subject.
Combined.
Globally.
Yeah. Wow. Crazy.
If I had a mic, I'd drop it right now.
Now-
Oh, I do.
Where are we right now? So up until this week, the most that any frontier model had ever scored against Humanities' last exam had been the O1 model. So it had scored 9.1 out of 100. ChatGPT 4.0 was 3.3, Grok was 3.8, Claude was 4.3, and Gemini was 7.7. So that's where we were if you took this week out of the equation. This week, Deepseek came on the scene and scored a benchmark score of 9.4 out of 100. O3, which just launched a few days ago, came in at 13. And O3 Deep Research came in at 26. So you went from 4.0 at a score of 3 out of 100 to O3 Deep Research at a score of 26, a 560% delta in 7 months. Improvement against this exam. So what does that tell you? If you assume the same rate of improvement, the benchmark's going to be saturated by the end of this year, or at the latest early 26.
Yeah.
So the really profound thing about that is I actually think it gives you some kind of timeline for AGI.
Yeah.
It feels like AGI will be announced sometime in 2026.
I think that's. I mean, yeah, I get it, but it's I've heard that they're talking maybe 24, 36 months to saturate the benchmark, but
yeah, I think also what's really interesting, we'll come on to in my section about batteries later on and other things. What it's also showing us is that the incremental advancements in so many areas is now speeding up. So solutions to so many of some of the fundamental problems that we have in the world are all just around the corner. And we talked about this earlier on, but I always love the analogy: are you a wizard or are you a prophet? Prophets, it's all doom and gloom.
Yeah.
We're all going to die.
the European Union.
And wizards are, the magic's coming, there's a spell to sort this out. And definitely I think we're all wizards, or that belief system. And some of the stuff we're seeing is just kind of flagging the road path ahead. Has lots of positives, not all positives, but a lot of positives coming really quickly down the line.
I mean, we were talking about this, Paddy, when I was driving back from breakfast this morning. When you actually have some kind of idea of how profound this is, you almost want to grab everybody that you see and just grab them by the ears and scream into their face, like, have you got any idea what's happening here? Like, there are people innocently putting their clothes on this morning to go out and work in credit control or in customer service or in maybe in the future lawyer roles.
Absolutely.
Who have no idea how quickly and how violently this is going to show up in their doorstep. And as we spoke this morning, Paddy, it'll just be, do you know the way Klarna did oh, by the way, guys, we just replaced 700 people, customer service agents with an agent.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what's going to happen. Delta Airlines will just announce that they've paid off 400 people in their customer support department and then 174 people in their credit control department and
replace them with an AI agent.
And replace them with an AI agent.
You told your wife yet you've replaced her with an AI agent?
On a very small anecdotal level, we're working on a wee Skunkworks project inside the business. We're building a digital salesperson for the products that we sell. And I demoed it to Stephen in the kitchen before we came out here. How good is it? Like,
incredible.
Seriously. I mean, at this point, for that one test product that's in there, you're way better. If you accidentally got us on the phone by mistake, you know, God love you, you would have got a much better experience dealing with that digital agent that we've built. So,
and I think that's it. There's so many. I mean, I know because I speak on this stuff, Stephen. You can conduct a straw poll every couple of weeks because you teach and you're in front of a room full of people. It's astonishing to me how profound these breakthroughs are and how quickly the future is accelerating towards us. And yet at the same time, you've got this other trend, which is almost nobody you know is actually using AI on a regular daily basis.
Can I give you a great analogy from today? I was teaching today in a fabulous course, information technology for young lawyers. So law students, and lovely firm came in and showed law graduates a case management system for lawyers. So really great, real technology, which most lawyers are still kind of messing about with. And I said to someone afterwards, we're talking about these kind of legacy systems, basic data management, and yet students and people are actually hearing about ChatGPT, and they can't quite understand why the system, it looks amazing, but it doesn't actually do any of the things that you can see in the real world happening today. Yeah. That kind of so I think we're always about to jump over a whole level of technology.
But when you hear what Paddy just said there, I mean, remember a couple of weeks ago you were saying, is this going to affect law? No, not anytime soon. But, you know, if you've got models here that can deconstruct the atomic anatomy of a hummingbird's fucking wing, like, surely to God it can get to grips with... Because what is law? Law is just information, a defined rule set, and some deep reasoning.
Well, I think two things which are really interesting when we talk about law. I think the reasoning models make a huge difference. You can see the workings. You can take the citations. The one, not the major problem, there's still, I think, one of the problems law tends to have is not great at data capture. So the reference points to train it against, as far as, certainly, for example, in Scotland, we don't record many of our cases. So therefore getting access to that stuff is actually quite difficult for models to learn on, but it's getting better all the time. So it's coming. And I think the reasoning models will make the law issues much easier to deal with.
Nothing shall be untouched.
Well, that's a good point Andy's made, and I'd never thought about it like that before. I mean, law is codified literally into a book, right? The bar, or however the bar manifests itself. We've got US analogies here, but law is codified into a rule set, and then it's just a bunch of reasoning across the rule set. And what lends itself any better to that than AI? I mean, it's amazing to me that it's not already been disrupted if you think about it.
Yeah. Dispute resolution.
We need to keep an eye on that. I need to do more research on AI and its impact on law. Maybe that's a subject for another
one we'll look at for a future week.
Anyway, that's a good one.
All right, we're pretty much there with the AI stuff right now. I think this is the trend that's just going to keep on rolling. I think there's going to be meaningful AI stuff to talk about every week. And what's pretty clear for the comments and the messages that we get, it is the reason a lot of people tune into this. By the way, thank you everybody who's watching or listening to this. We now have listeners in 17 countries and 137 cities around the world. That's absolutely incredible. So
I thought there was a really good chance we would be sitting in here for a year just screaming into the void, like just talking to each other.
And can I also have a big shout out to my mum, who's my one listener, and thank you for listening, Mum.
Thanks for downloading 10,462 times. All right, that's it for AI this week. Andy, tell us about the impending death of the high street.
Well, I mean, this is a wee bit of a kind of depressing story, but kind of we are where we are, and I suppose it dovetails kind of into some of the chat that we've just been having there on AI. So, according to the Centre for Retail Research, the UK lost just over 13,500 retail shops last year, representing 37 store closures every single day.
Wow.
Depressingly, that number is expected to rise this year to 17,300. Now, when you actually dig into the reasons cited here, unsurprisingly, it's higher operational costs and lower footfall. So I wanted to explore what's driving this retail apocalypse, what sectors are being hit the hardest, business models that are still working on the high street, and what can be done with these dying high streets as this trend plays out, because it's clear it is going to play out to a bad place. So, firstly, when we unpack the higher cost, the big line items in there are the things you would think are in there. It's higher minimum wage, it's higher national insurance contributions.
Basically the budget, yeah.
The budget. And the one that business owners scream blue murder about. I spoke to multiple retailers before this week to try and get some ideas. And the business rates one is the one that they scream blue murder about. So the work's been done in this by a company called the Altus Group. And they reckon that rate bills for the average retail store will more than double this year, from $3,500 to £8,600 for the average retail location. When you look inside the store closure numbers, one of the numbers that really jumps out at you is that of the 17,300 store closures expected this year, 84% of them are independent retailers.
Right. So it's not like chains going bust.
No. So are you
And by
surprised
the way,
about
these
that?
UK numbers.
These are UK numbers.
Okay.
By the way, it's no better in the US. It's actually worse. In America, they're forecasting double the store closures in 25 than they were for 24. So this is not a UK phenomenon, but I do have some UK numbers here to to bring into focus. So before we go any further, I just want to find out for you two, is there anything there that's surprised you? Is this just Darwinian evolution playing out, or is there something fundamentally unjust here that's happening?
What you've said, you see on a day-to-day basis. What always amazes me, and I'm sure you'll come on to it, is you can travel. I travel around Scotland sometimes, and I see some terrible high streets in real messes, and yet there are still pockets. Pitlochry, for example, beautiful town, fabulous high street, still very busy, but probably the exception rather than the rule.
So what's your experience with independent retail, Paddy, when you've had to use it recently?
Hit and miss. So moved house 2 years ago, had to go out and buy a bunch of TVs, went to PC World, walked in, spoke to a young kid, and I told him, walked about the shop for 5 minutes, and I went, I need 4 of those types of TV. And he went away for 20 minutes, and he came back, and he went, we don't have that one. And I went, oh shit, right, okay.
But was this an independent retail?
No,
or was
this is
a big
PC
chain
World.
retail?
Yeah.
So we're talking 84% of these closures are going to be independent stores.
So I'm going to tell you my bad story, and then I'll tell you a good story. So the bad story was the chains.
Yeah.
So bunch of staff who obviously don't want to be there. I know more about the products than they fucking do.
Yeah.
And you just have bad attitudes and people who don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So the guy comes back out and he goes, we don't have that one. I went, right, I'll take that one then. And then he disappeared for another 20 minutes and he came back out and he went, we don't have that one either. And I went, so what ones do you have? And he went, I don't know, you just have to keep feeding me TV. And I'll go through and see if we've got them there. I was like, fuck this, I'm leaving. So that's been my general experience of chain store retail. Terrible. Absolutely terrible. Independent retail, I've had some great experiences on that. My wife wears glasses. She goes to our buddy Iola from Brian Maguire's
Shout
Iola.
out Brian Maguire.
And she meets a bunch of people who really know their stuff, who've got great attitudes, who are enthusiastic, and nice surroundings where you feel like you're getting time from experts who know more about the product than you do.
Yeah.
And so I would say Iola is a great example of just like awesome retail done right.
Like you, I think we're talking about the same shop as well, but in preparation for this podcast, I had to get one of these boom arms, and I've ended up with the shittest boom arm out of the three of you. Even though
you're cheap.
No, I paid more. Mine's cost more than that one. Anyway, I went
Mine's
in.
cost more than both of yours combined.
Exactly.
You also buy 4 televisions at one point.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Anyway, I went in and I stood in the shop for 10 minutes trying to get somebody's attention, and then the guy finally walked by and I went, "Excuse me, mate, I'm looking for one of those boom arms for a podcast mic." And he went, "No, mate, we don't do anything like that," and walked away. And then literally 12 seconds later, not 6 feet away from where I was standing,
Was a boom arm.
was a boom arm. And I found it myself and just forget it. Just grabbed it and walked up to the checkout. So unfortunately, that is quite a typical experience for me in retail. There's generally a lack of staff training. I'm not sure if that's due to how the turnover of staff, or how maybe they just don't have the resources to train them properly, but there seems to be a lack of product knowledge and staff training. And again, like you, I've also done the white glove kind of fitting service at Iola, where I went into their West George Street store and they said, "Oh, you've got a big bald head. Let's make sure we get you the right shape of, frames and stuff for your face type. Oh, your skin tone." And I'm like,
It's grey and lifeless.
And for those listening from abroad, bald simply means round.
Yeah. Big round cow's head.
But it's even stuff like, "Oh, skin." And I'm like, "Skin? I've got a skin tone, right? Okay." And anyway, it was very white glove. Everybody really knew their stuff. You were very well looked after, and you come out of there going, "Wow, that was a really
But
nice
that's the
experience."
exception. It's not the rule, right? I mean, I think we can all think you almost have to take hospitality as a retail experience and pigeonhole that, because it's almost, because we can all think of great hospitality retail experiences in your local cafes and restaurants that you frequent regularly. But outside of that, when you're actually buying goods, it's very, very difficult for me, at least, to get a good local retail experience.
So I feel like saying, get to the point.
So the point is, let's see if we can fix retail in 5 minutes here. So what do we know about the retail companies that are still doing well? Well, they all have similar characteristics. They are, number one, omni-channel. So Paddy, you built e-commerce solutions for a living before you sold your business.
Buy online, pick up in store.
How easy is it for any retailer with a couple of hundred SKUs in the shop to spool up an online presence and start selling their product on the internet?
Astonishingly easy, is the answer.
So that's kind of what I mean.
And inexpensive.
Yeah. So there's no real excuse for just being a retail only, shop. The next one is, most of them have got some kind of experiential component to them. Can you think of any good experiential retail offerings?
Well, you just give them one. Iola.
Iola. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, the fact that we're struggling to name another one other than Iola,
No, I'm not saying that
it's almost a great...
And that's kind of the point I'm making. I don't think a lot of this is happening on your average high street now. But for the guys that are doing well, these tend to be the things that they've kind of got in common. And the other one's differentiated products or services. So one of the things I notice, even shops that you wouldn't think are well-run shops like cash generators and cash converters, I know multiple members of staff that work in them. And one of the things that they do is they stand up an online...
Told you Andy was cheap. He's in cash generators looking for a 9-year-old iPhone for $50.
But one of the things they do is they use the cash generator as a wee fulfillment centre as well. So every retail location is its own wee mini fulfillment centre. Mm-hmm. And because there's somebody up the stairs packaging stuff, putting it on eBay, putting it on Facebook Marketplace, and because they've got that operation within the retail location, they're able to support a much bigger SKU count in the shop, which bizarrely creates more footfall and revenue. And of course, they're able to support more revenue and profitability to make that shop viable in the future. So omni-channel, experiential component, differentiated product or service, that's our prescription to fix independent retail on the high street. Just to finish here, what does it actually mean? What is the future vision of our high streets now? So you walk down Kilmarnock, you walk down Irvine, God forbid you walk down Ayr. I mean, these are very, very poor looking high streets. They're overly built out now with empty shops lying everywhere. What does the future look like for the high street?
I think 2 or 3 things are going to happen. Paddy covered it there really clearly. Try in person, buy online. I think there's a shortage of places to see, touch and feel So I think that could be Amazon warehouse on your high street. We can go in. So an Argos type store. So that's 1 point. 2, we want to eat and drink. So there's parts of Glasgow, we all know Govan Hill, phenomenal explosion of great restaurants, etc. Then thirdly, living spaces. It's going to become much more of a living space again. We don't need the amount of footage. So I think we're going to see a conversion back to greener, more livable spaces. So I think you're going to see residential returning to high street in the way it was probably 50 years ago. And people actually live in town.
I actually think that prescription is absolutely spot on, because when I did some research on the regeneration projects that had been really successful in town centres around, in high streets around the UK, it was all under this concept: live, shop, work, play.
Yep.
You've got to take away some of the old inventory because it's just overbuilt out, replace it with residential units. What does residential do? It gets people living in the high street and gives you ready-made consumers
supports any businesses on the high street. Yeah.
Same with office buildings. And then, as you say, vibrant food and drink scene. And then add in a wee bit of cultural stuff in as well. Can you get a college in there? Can you get a theatre in there? Can you get a cinema in there? And so, but of course, these are all easier said than done.
Yeah,
they require big regen projects.
You can see
that require a
pockets
lot of
where
money.
this is actually happening. The problem is it's not happening at any scale. And I assume that we are not the first people to come up with this prescription. I mean, somebody much smarter than us probably come up with this prescription a long time ago. So why has it not happened?
Well, I suppose one of the challenges is, how do you force the landlords? Do you do a forced purchase of the shops there for landlords?
But who's buying the shops?
Well, that's one of the problems. Most of the shops in your average high street will be held by either individual investors or small funds. Unless you've got very, very big units, it's not going to be the massive funds. So you've got people who are perhaps traditionally relying on a rent, who are suddenly seeing their rent yields going down, the value of their unit going down, and they have to be comfortable with actually selling out. Secondly, you need to get the planners on board for allowing conversion. In fact, what's quite interesting, take somewhere like Edinburgh, we've got some of these beautiful shops in the bottom of Georgian buildings. A lot of these shops were originally ground floors of houses. And over time, because these big houses were there, they converted the ground floors into shops. What we're actually just seeing is a reversal of what happened maybe 100 and 150 years ago. So planning will be one of the big issues that will drive that forward, and easing up the planning regulations.
So it looks like retail is just consolidating into the big chains that are well-heeled, that have got resources and money and are already omnichannel and can do a bit of experiential and do have the pricing power to sell the products cheap, are going to continue to dominate the high street. And unfortunately, it looks like despite our fantastic prescription for them, we've maybe reduced that count from 17,300 to maybe 17,250.
Which might not be a bad thing, because what we don't need is another vape shop to accommodate the other 17 vape shops on the high street, because the high street now seems to be pound stores or dollar stores, shops where you can buy vapes and takeaways?
Yeah.
And charity stores, because charities get away with alleviate the problem of the rates, because a charity store didn't have to pay rates.
Yeah.
So a slightly gloomy story there, but I thought that was worth covering. Stephen, what have you got for us today?
So I'm going to talk about batteries tonight. What Paddy was talking about earlier, ChatGPT changes. Sometimes we look for these big changes, and these big changes revolutionise the world. What we don't realise is the little changes that are coming, and they're coming fast down the line, many of them being powered by AI and technologies. We talked a couple of weeks ago about the power infrastructure, the problems with the power infrastructure, and one of the things I touched on then was the shortfall in battery capacity, and it got me kind of quite interested in what was happening with batteries. So we did a bit of a deep dive this week into batteries. I'll try not to be too technical. I'm going to give a quick shout out to a young Neil. Thank you for his chemical input. And I'll try and leave some of that stuff out.
My new LinkedIn buddy. I think he followed me on LinkedIn the other day. Yeah.
Listening to us from Geneva, I think, tonight.
Very good.
So, and one of the things that...
Shout out to the Swiss. Send a Toblerone real fast.
Well, one of the things that also got me thinking about this one was, again, just some of the changes that are happening. the golden chalice for power is, of course, plasma. And when we work that one out, we're going to have effectively limitless, almost free power.
So plasma being what? Fusion?
Fusion.
Yeah.
So basically, what happens on the sun, basically taking hydrogen, oxygen, bouncing it together, creating power. And one of the problems that we have is creating the conditions here on Earth, i.e. sunlight temperatures, to allow fusion to take place. And a company called East Tokamak, which is a Chinese company, had held the record for containing sunlight heat.
Well, it's all you're creating a mini sun, right?
Effectively, a mini sun.
Creating a mini sun, a few particles big, but it's effectively a mini sun.
Absolutely. And the previous record had been 403 seconds. They've now extended that to 1,066 seconds. So effectively, they've created a mini sun on the Earth for about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
We're not with fusion yet, but it's coming down the line fast.
And if you can do it for 1,000 seconds, eventually you can do it for 10,000 seconds or 10,000 hours. And, you know.
And so we're already hearing...
We're on that curve now with that whole thing.
Talk of plasma generators. So we're going to talk a wee bit tonight about batteries. So let me give you just a quick couple of stories or talks about what is a battery. And what's interesting is batteries have been around since about the 18th century. And fundamentally, the batteries that Voltaire created haven't changed since the 18th century. The principles are the same. You have an anode, a negative electrode, the source of your electrons, a cathode, positive electrode, destination of electrons, electrolyte, the kind of liquid which allows the ions to move backwards and forwards, and a separator to split them. And basically, that's what a battery is. And the best analogy I could find was, think of it like a bank. The ions are your account. You go to a outside a dealer and you buy some money, you spend your money. So that's your circuit. It's going to pull your money out of your bank through your anode. And that's going to affect your balance in your account, the ions. And then eventually you have to put that money back in. So you can put that back in through the cathode, and that's going to sort out your balance and put the ions
Top you back up again.
Your ions back to their resting state. So that is all a battery is. And as I say, 1800, we had lead acid coming along about 1859. And really what we're living on today, which is lithium ion, has been about since 1990. Sony started that with their portable electrics. And effectively, to some extent, what you've got even in your Tesla cars today is just hundreds of them all linked in together. And the problem that it has is safety. So we've heard of these problems about batteries blowing up, going on fire. We'll talk a wee bit tonight about energy density. And all that means is how much power can we get into that space? So lithium ion has okay, but not fabulous energy density. So we want to get the energy density up.
And so for example, what does a car run on?
Let me come back to some of those later on, because it's probably easier if I start, rather than going off in that tangent just now. Another problem we've got is that we rely on scarce materials. So we know that lithium-ion batteries are using lithium, cobalt, nickel, all things that are hard to get hold of. So scaling them is difficult. So what I found really interesting was to see some of the things that are coming down the line, and they're coming down the line really quickly now. So ultimately what we want is high energy density batteries. So what does that mean? 500 watts per kilogram. So basically getting 500 watts out of 1 kilogram of weight. We want it to be safe. We want it to be rapid to charge. So again, we've heard all these stories. You both know how long it takes to charge your cars up. And we want it to be sustainable, i.e. it's not going to take a terrible toll on the environment. So there's a couple of big ones coming down the line, which I'll come on to in a second. Solid state, and lithium sulfur batteries. So I'll come back to those. What I want to touch on really quickly is, why is it so difficult? Because you kind of think to yourself, well, there's only 4 things, so ultimately just make everything better.
Yeah.
And the best analogy I can give was, you remember as a kid you would get a can of fizzy drink or a bottle of fizzy drink, and you get a Mentos mint sweet. You throw it in the bottle, shake it up, bloody thing would explode everywhere. You go, wow, that was fabulous. Well, you take the same size chocolate sweet and throw it into the can, nothing happens. Take the same size aspirin, throw it in the can, nothing happens.
Yeah.
So the way that chemicals interact with each other, if you change the chemical, you can change one thing to be more efficient, everything else then has a problem. So getting improvements is about balancing off all of the different elements, and just making a better anode or cathode or electrolyte is not sufficient in itself. So there's a couple of key challenges. Solid state, which I'll come on to in a second, is probably the way forward. And that's when effectively you take out the liquid, the electrolyte, and you make it into a solid. So imagine you've got a river and you want to cross the river. Well, that's a ferry. Not particularly efficient. It takes a long time, affected by currents. Imagine you put a bridge there, a solid bridge, drive backwards and forwards as fast as you like.
Yeah.
So solid state is the answer to most batteries. But it suffers from a thing called dendrite formation. Basically, think of those as tiny little stalagmites, tiny little pins that grow through charging. Yeah. So that's been the big issue for solid state, this dendrite formation. And we're starting to see technologies, really nanotechnologies, where they're building layers and structures at very, very small levels, which will minimize or mitigate the dendrite formation. And then you've got things like electrolyte stability. So basically that soup can be problematic, and it can cause cracking, for example, when we start to use ceramic polymers. So basically think of that as like you're making too brittle, like glass, it'll just break. And then you've also got a thing which I love called polysulfide shuttling, which again, we'll not go into, but basically just think about a big sponge and blue dye. And ultimately, over a period of time, what happens is the blue dye starts to mess up the sponge. So the sponge becomes useless and you get less and less blue dye. So again, all of these things are all causing issues. Different things connect together differently. So the interface compatibility, once you start changing the materials, the way they connect together, and then ultimately scalability, what things are easy to get your hands on. So what's been interesting is we're seeing some really interesting solutions. A company called Northwestern are basically using graphene to coat things. So again, graphene is a nanotechnology based on carbon. NASA are using it, again, for their cathodes, and that's allowing them to up the wattage well above 500 watts per kilogram.
Compared to what right now?
Well, we can be sitting anything from, and again, it depends. Some of the technologies are actually quite interesting. Technologies will range. A lead acid battery is about 30 to 50 watts. Your typical lithium, I'm just trying to see what I've got here. Lithium, I think, can be 500. Sodium can be 100. So these watts per kilogram will range from 60 to about a couple hundred for most batteries at the moment.
So 500 is a step change.
It's a big step change, yeah. And again, my grasping the numbers is probably not what it should be in that one. Other things is we've got improved manufacturing techniques. So this ability to look at things at the atomic level, etc. So, other thing that is happening, they've been to look at organic cathodes. Now, I was wondering, organic, does that mean it's made out of plants? No, we're starting to work far more with carbon-based materials, so the likes of carbon, hydrogen, etc. So it gets away from cobalt, nickel, all the things that are problematic. And that allows much better scaling. So lots and lots of things are kind of coming together. We're seeing really two potentially groundbreaking things coming at the moment. We're looking at solid state. So at the moment, Hyundai and Toyota are both putting their money into that. Both of them are talking about solid state batteries being capable of being used in their vehicles, I think from as early as 2026.
Okay.
Some probably looking at for 2030, but they're betting the house on it. And we've talked before about the challenges to the traditional car markets. If they get that right, they will be able to really revolutionize the market. And don't forget, it's not just about wattage per kilogram.
Yeah.
Because one of the problems you've then got is how many cycles will it take?
Yeah.
So basically, one of the benefits, again, of solid state is you can get 2,000 plus cycles as opposed to much
cycles
more.
being how many times can you charge and discharge
it.
them
So
out?
we've all seen our Apple phones or
Yeah,
watches go down over time. The other one, which is quite interesting, is obviously Tesla. Tesla launched their Model Y, I think it is next year. They're using a semi-solid state battery. So that means there's still liquid in the middle of it. And it's kind of the middle ground. One of the benefits of that is it doesn't require dramatic re-engineering. They're using largely the same, as far as I understand it, plant. They're just going back a stage. So you can do much more. Both Toyota and Hyundai, I think, are pretty much having to start from scratch.
Yeah.
Tesla are using...
Which is, if you think about it, is actually a benefit for them.
Yeah.
Because legacy is a hell of a thing.
Yeah,
I mean,
you're
if
encumbered
you're
by-
crushed under the weight of...
The tooling and, you know,
here's all the competing concerns. It's like, does it have enough energy density? Does it have enough cycles? And can it be manufactured in sufficient volumes where it can make 3 million Teslas next year? And so all these three things have to be true. But if you don't make electric vehicles, or you make enough electric vehicles to count them on your hands and your fucking toes, then you can start with a brand new battery technology because you're not crushed under the weight of the legacy.
Oh, and by the way, a Tesla needs to be drivable in 15, 20 years, so it needs to do 5,000 or 6,000 discharges.
Yeah.
Cycles.
Well, just to tell you, the target for the Toyotas, and they're going to bring them out as hybrids first of all, but they're saying that they reckon eventually they're going to get to 750 miles with a 10-minute charging time. Okay. That from 10 to 80%. And they expect production 2026, mass production 2030. So really within a relatively short period. Hyundai are looking at about 600 plus miles, 50% fast charging, and they're looking at, again, pilot 2025. So effectively starting this year, mass by 2030. So coming down the road pretty quickly.
Do we know if they're going to be way more expensive than the standard battery tech at the moment?
Costs, I think, of production because we're using less rare minerals. So basically, we're going to bring down, so it's back to the AI scenario, we're bringing down the cost of production, we're putting up what we can push out through it.
It's the amount of these things that's required that's staggering. I remember watching a video of the early Gigafactory when it was getting constructed, and they were showing a machine that made the battery cells, and there was tons of them. There was like a warehouse full of them. And the guy who was narrating the video said, the cells have to come out of this machine faster than the bullets would come out of a machine gun in order to keep up with the demand that we need to create all these packs to build all these Teslas. So I think the mass manufacturing, Elon always says prototyping's easy, manufacturing's hard.
Yeah.
I think everybody can show you something working at small scale, but the big test is, do you have the manufacturing prowess to build that so you can make millions and millions of units every year?
And that's why they've gone for the hybrid electrolyte. Again, energy density up to about 500 watts. And again...
But they're not promising any more range on that car.
No, they are. They reckon
it's
that
an extra 25 miles from what I read.
They think with all of the other improvements that are coming in the line, they again should be getting up to 500 and 600 miles relatively quickly.
I suppose,
so all of these things are...
at some point it doesn't matter, does it? Like, if your car can do 350 miles, does it matter if it can do 500 miles, like, between charges? There comes a point where...
No, if it can charge in 10 minutes, and that's the difference, right? I mean, it's almost more important to bring the charge speed down than massively increase the amount of miles.
I think once you get the energy density up, it becomes largely irrelevant because the network to charge becomes less important. You can wait till you get home or to your destination. Much above 500-600 miles, we forget about it. In fact, it's easier than having petrol stations. Just come home at night, plug it in, and you're done.
Plus, you can't charge in 10 minutes because there'll only be 3 chargers in the entire country that can fire electricity into your car that quickly. Yeah.
But really quickly, there's a couple of other things I want to touch on before we go, because ultimately it's not one technology that's going to make all the difference here. So the other things that are happening, silicon anodes. So basically I talked about anodes, cathodes. We're starting to look at other materials because, again, it's the anodes and the cathodes that are made often from the problematic materials. So silicon, of course, is effectively sand, easy to use, great material. It has a problem. It's a bit like a sponge again. It expands. So silicon would have been a great anode, but wasn't readily usable until they worked out how to mix it with other things. So again, I think as a company, and again, the name Sila Nanotechnologies, American company, they have built a silicon titanium anode, and they've effectively built a structure. So also almost imagine a metal chain around the anode, holding the silicon in space in place, so when it fills up with electrons, it doesn't blow out. So again, it allows you to replace existing batteries with silicon titanium batteries. So it's a plug-in. Now, what's interesting about them is, and I can't find out what they're in, and I've looked a couple of places, but they claim to be already in over millions of wearables.
Okay.
And Mercedes are using silicon titanium batteries in their EVs as of next year. So coming down the line, Mercedes-Benz G-classes are coming with them. And it goes on, it goes on, it goes on.
Yeah.
There are a lot of battery technologies, tiny ones. A couple of things I want to just touch on really quickly, because it also starts to give some possible solutions for our hydroelectric problem. You remember, hydroelectric creates all this fabulous power, but not when we need it.
Yeah.
So
you got to store it and transmit it.
Solid state and semi-solid state are the two major technologies for wind farm storage. We're going to see a lot more of that. And the other one that I really liked was liquid flow batteries, which again apparently work really well on site. So they're not
stationary storage.
Station storage, which effectively is almost like a little hydroelectric dam as a battery. It uses the ions, the electrolytes are stored in 2 tanks, and it just pushes them between them. So effectively, you've got that. So think of batteries over the next few years as being the Chris Hoy of the tech world. Incredibly important to what we do, incredibly useful, and it won't be just one thing. Chris Hoy was the best cyclist in the world because he did a lot of little things better all the time.
And everybody
else. That's where battery technology is going, I think.
I think it all feeds into Elon's prediction years ago, which is eventually all transportation, with the exception of rockets, will go electric.
Yeah.
And it's not like we need new electric motors to make that happen. We need better battery technology. And it looks like that very much is on the horizon. We've never talked before about what an absurd solution the combustion engine is for the problem it's trying to solve, you know? Like, all it's trying to do is turn a shaft. That's it. It's not trying to do anything else other than spin a shaft. And to do that, you've got all these
thousands of moving
valves
parts,
and pistons and rods and oils and chains and belts, and they all have to work at millimeter precision.
But you said it.
All in the service of turning a rod.
Yeah, but you said it well at the beginning. Legacy is what kills you.
Yeah.
So it's that ability to look. So we've been invested way too much in legacy, and we need to be able to jump forward a stage or two.
Okay. There you go. Now, I think on top of a very heavy science corner section, why don't we do a quick 5-minute trade war palette cleanser?
And a moose bush.
A little trade war palette cleanser. So the background to this is this week, Trump announced tariffs on China, on Mexico,
Canada,
and on Canada.
Yeah.
So I did a little bit of digging into them to see, because I wasn't actually sure how I felt about that. I wasn't sure if I felt it was fair, if it was unfair, if it was reasonable, if it was unreasonable. So I did my own digging on it, and I discovered, and by the way, Ryan, who's the guy at Flexport?
Yeah.
He's almost
good.
like a world authority on shipping goods around the world. He's got a great Twitter feed on this. So it turns out that the The tariffs mostly will target something called de minimis goods. So there's a loophole in the free trade agreements covering de minimis goods. I think it goes back to the 1930s. And so it refers to a long-standing law allowing goods valued at under $800 to be shipped directly to consumers without customs declarations.
Right.
And so
that covers a lot of stuff.
And that covers an awful lot of stuff. And it's what's gave rise to Temu and Shein, who are basically leveraging this loophole, this de minimis goods loophole. Now, the cynic in you could say, well, do you know what? The loopholes allowed Shein and other companies like them to ship over 1 billion packages to the US from China last year. And you could say that that's a lot of shitty goods that are probably, a lot of them unsafe, toxic, etc. So I hadn't actually thought about that as an angle. When I first heard it, it just seemed punitive. It seemed like a bit of lashing out. But actually, when you look at that, why should Temu and Shein and companies like them get a free ride, bypass the whole customs apparatus and all the costs and regulations associated with that, where if you're an American retailer and you're buying goods in by the container load from abroad, then you are subject to all that additional cost and regulation.
I don't have a problem with that, and there's a lot of reasons why I think this could be a really good thing, but that doesn't quite play out for China and or Mexico.
No, so I think the difference is with Mexico and Canada, there's free trade agreements in place with both of those companies.
Yeah.
So then the question is, well, how can we just throw the free trade agreements to the side? Well, I think it's there are provisions within the law that if it's related to a national security issue, then that supersedes any free trade agreement.
Which is why there's been so much talk track on the Canada and Mexico thing that, the fentanyl and, people pouring into our border. So they've obviously created the national security angle, I'm sure.
Yeah.
As a smokescreen to get those tariffs.
So what do we think is actually happening here? Because what we know about tariffs is the people that end up paying the price of tariffs are the actual citizens, right?
I think the clue is in the action.
It's inflationary. It's
So
higher cost goods and services.
So historically, tariffs would have been a way to balance out, for example, either imports that affected your core industries. So protection of the car industry would be a great one. Chinese electrical cars, why they could possibly crush the European car manufacturers. Or they're a way of counterbalancing subsidies in-house within a country. So China, for example, indirectly subsidizing the cost of production. Tariffs would do that. But I don't think that's what Trump's done here. I think he's using this as a lever.
Bargaining chip.
Bargaining chip,
And the clue is in the action. Both the Canadians and the Mexicans were proactively trying to contact Trump and enter into a negotiation, and he just shut the conversation down completely. And the idea was, we're not having a conversation right now. You're going to feel some pain, and then I will show up soon enough with my list of demands. And did they not put 10,000 troops on the Mexican border or something tonight?
I think tonight Mexico have come out and effectively capitulated and said, yep, we'll put 10,000 troops on the border.
Yeah.
We'll set up a task force to stop fentanyl coming into the country. So to that extent, you could say it's been pretty effective.
Yep.
Is that fair?
And there's a real, and you know the way they go, well, tariffs are reciprocal. Well, every tariff that he issued, there was a decree sent along with it which said, if there is any reciprocating action, the tariffs will then ramp and ramp and ramp. And because you're a far smaller economy, you'll break first kind of thing.
I think for the guys who've capitulated, I mean, there was emissaries sent down to Panama, and now the Panamanian government have came out and they've got some timeline to reduce China's influence in the Panama Canal. So I think basically the words went out for the people who've capitulated. It's became pretty clear that on the back of their capitulation, it was really just a negotiation trip to get to a deal. Canada, who's not capitulated, who's came out strongly and imposed their own tariffs, it'll be fascinating to see how that one plays out. And
what do you think he wanted? What do you think Trump wants out of Canada then?
I don't know, but I do know that tariffs imposed on Canada are not really workable. I mean, just for example, apparently cars made in Detroit pass the Canadian border something like 8 to 10 times. They go in and out of Canada 8 to 10 times as part of the manufacturing process. So tariffs, every time that happened, would be a massive hit for the auto industry in Detroit, which is already on its knees. So for me, it doesn't seem like... And why only 10% tariffs on China, but 25% on your neighbours in Canada? I don't know. I think we'll all have to see how it plays out. I think it's pretty clear it's a negotiating chip, but I don't think it's the first time we're going to be sitting here talking about tariffs. It's pretty clear that tariffs are going to be the main tool to get things done. And he's already said in an interview yesterday
the EU are
that the EU are getting tariffs next.
Yeah.
It's going to be fascinating again. America, powerhouse economy of the world, or one of the powerhouse. But ultimately, it's like being in a room of one big dog and lots of little dogs. There's only so much you can do until eventually the little dogs all get together and tear you down. Yeah. And I think you've got to be careful. It's like most things, don't use it too much. Use power sparingly. It's the thought of the action rather than the action itself. And I wonder if he's kind of shot his bolt too quickly. And it'll be interesting to see what the reactions to some of his stuff is.
We will not run out of things to talk about anytime soon. I think that's what we've concluded. Sure. All right, are we done? Is that us?
We're done.
Okay. Another epic, long, 1 hour, 10-minute long episode of the
our longest
Roundtable Rethink podcast in the can. Just before we go, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, or you can go to the website at www.roundtablerethink.com. That's it. We did it. Woo. All right, boys.
Another one down, and we haven't had to take Andy's spare parts yet. So we'll keep them for next week.
He made it through the episode.
Yeah, well done, Andy.
No more.
All right, folks, that's it. Catch you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.